Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, it is I am the one and only Pac-Man here, and once again I am back for the likes of the Mexi Toys videos. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome back for some more of Let's Play of Sonic 3D Flickies Island, aka for those of you who lived in North America, Sonic 3D Blast for specifically for the SEGA Saturn version. So, last time, we somehow managed able to explore into, once again, 3 zones, just like the Genesis/Mega Drive versions, which appears to be not only Spring Stadium, but in addition to Diamond Dust, and on top of that, Volcano Valley, and relatively speaking though, we also did manage to collect the last 3 Chaos Symbols within, let's say 2 zones in particular, in the forms within not only Spring Stadium, but in addition to 1 act in Diamond Dust. And as a result, after collecting all 7 Chaos Emeralds, we can able to actually access to the final zone, just like the forms of how it does on the Mega Drive/Sega Genesis version, which takes place in the final fight, as we expected. So because of that, yeah, and despite the fact that we accidentally died twice, by the way, in the Volcano Valley boss, because relatively speaking though, not only because of hesitation, but on top of all that stuff though, the jump angles are a little bit off, at least as far as I'm aware. But regardless of these issues though, we did this particular playthrough pretty decent enough as far as the actual midway portion as far as I'm aware. So today for this video, as you can definitely tell, we're going into the 6th zone, which takes place in Gadget Zone, or for that matter, the most annoying zone in the game, if only because of the platforming and those stupid turrets that keep shooting you in every single directions, and also not to mention though, until whenever we get into Act 2 of this particular place, it has this very annoying issue where it appears to be by the forms of how the fact. Remember when I said this before, or even Tiana has already brought it up, since on the Mega Drive/Sega Genesis version, you know with the isometric platforming, you have to deal with a lot, by the way? Well, obviously though, that's gonna be the worst case scenario for not only for the 2nd act in Gadget Zone, but until specifically the next zone after this, because you see, every time whenever you get into the isometric platforming, where it involves around the moving platform here and there, sometimes the game has this very wonky hit detection, which as a result, yeah, you see what I mean, if we dive into that particular act within Act 2, and on top of that with Panic Puppet Zone, specifically both Act 1 and Act 2. So because of that, and of course, if you couldn't tell, this is the first zone that does not feature not only Tails, but also Knuckles as well. So, yeah, because generally speaking, I was about the fact that between 5 zones, usually for Green Grove and Rusty Ruin, Spring Stadium, and Diamond Dust, and Volcano Valley are the only chances you can able to get in terms of the forms to try to participate in these special stages and even try to get the Chaos Emeralds. So because of that, and like I said before, between both Gadget Zone and in addition to Panic Puppet Zone, you can't get able to actually get the Chaos Emeralds or even participate in the special stages anymore. So because of that, you're about to be speaking out about the fact that luckily though, we are essentially almost done in terms of the forms of trying to rescuing those Flickies, because as a result, I believe we've only just got about 3 stages to go until we're basically done with the forms of that particular gameplay mechanic. Because, relatively speaking though, if we dive into Act 2 in Panic Puppet Zone, you pretty much know exactly what I'm talking about. So because of that, yeah, I've got nothing else to add. So, anyways though, a few things I want to talk about this is though, and that's what appears to be for the fact that, well, today's date of course there is the 25th of October today, in some cases in 2025 today, and for those of you who have become a Simpsons fan out there, did you guys know, for the fact that it's been 35 years since when the first ever episode featuring the forms of the Treehouse of Horror did somehow firstly begun, since in Season 2, which, gee, I can't even believe it's been 35 years since the Treehouse of Horror, the first installment episode in Season 2, did manage to take place in the forms within 1990. So because of that, yeah, happy 35th anniversary of Treehouse of Horror 1, which obviously though is the beginning of the forms of the most popular Halloween episodes for the sake of the forms of The Simpsons anyway. So relatively speaking, I was about the fact, I will still say, that the 5th installment is easily the best one, just because of all that, you know, the famous bits from the SEGA Thief forms of the parody of The Shining, and you pretty much get the idea about what this is going. So anyway, and also I'd like to point things out too, is about the fact that, remember what Sonic did somehow manage able to point out when it comes to the forms of something new just came up, thanks to the forms of the Kirby Air Riders Nintendo Direct. Well, conveniently enough though, he did already point out there's going to be some more riders as far as the forms of playable characters as far as I'm aware. I did recently check out, there's going to be a grand total of 20 playable characters in Kirby Air Riders, so that's going to be a lot more compared to the forms of how it does it from the original game, because obviously though, the original game technically only has like, let's just say, quite a few playable characters here and there. I mean, mind you though, it has been a very long while since I actually have last played Kirby Air Ride for the GameCube, but hopefully I'll get around into that at some point, just before, you know, Kirby Air Riders for Nintendo Switch 2 will be arriving. So because of that, yeah, I've got nothing else to say about this, I suppose. So, I suppose, relatively speaking, when it comes to playable characters department, when it comes to Kirby Air Riders, that consists of not only Kirby himself, but also King Dedede, Meta Knight, Bandana Waddle Dee, and on top of that, Knuckle Joe, Waddle Doo, and even Waddle Dee, the regular counterpart of Waddle Dee, and even Rocky, Gooey, and on top of that, Chef Kowalski, I think is what it says anyway, and even Cappy, and even with Scarfy, and also Rick, and even Starman, as well as the forms of Megalore, and on top of that, Lolo and La La La. And there's also Marks, Daruch from Kirby Mouse Attack or Kirby Squeak Squad for those of you who lived in North America, which is very surprising. And there's also Taranza from the likes of Kirby Triple Deluxe. And I think we've now come to the last one, and that's what appears to be Susie from the likes of Kirby Planet Robobot. So yeah, oh, and there's also Marks as well from the likes of Kirby Superstar. So, yeah, that's quite a lot of playable characters this time around compared to the original, that's for sure. Especially considering about the fact, as far as what Sonic has already mentioned about this since in yesterday's Skyscraper Mode video for Luigi's Mansion 3, he did point out for the fact that not only does 9 new tracks, to be more specifically, will be included in the actual game, and there's also going to be 9 retro tracks from the original game, making a grand total of whopping 18 tracks to race on. So because of that, meaning all of these Kirby Air Ride courses will be playable in Kirby Air Riders, which is very, very awesome in my book. So, oh yeah, this is the part I was talking about with the stupid isometric platforming right there. Because again, the hit detection might be felt a bit wonky at times, especially because no matter what though, you can actually bypass for that platform if you not time your jumps correctly, which as a result, it will be annoyingly consistent when it comes to more specifically if you go into trickier situations, especially noticeable in this particular zone, and as well as on that though, same applies to the forms of Panic Puppet Zone as well. I mean, relatively speaking, though, it's about the fact that sometimes, you know, platforming in isometric platforming or isometric view might not be the best solution in the world, unlike something like, you know, Super Mario RPG, not only on the Super Nintendo original, but in addition to the recent Switch remake. At the very least, the isometric platforming is a lot better. Well, in terms of the Switch remake, that is, just because you're able to actually have full 360 controls within the forms within the Switch Pro controller, and even with Switch Joy-Con controllers as well. So yeah, you get the idea for that point. So anyway, oh, and it's also worth noting for too, is about the fact that we actually got ourselves some more confirmations for the sake of the forms of some brand new remasters as far as the actual games itself is concerned. Like, for instance, though, until next year, Fallout 4 Anniversary Edition is going to be happening until 2026. So, and as a result, it's going to be yet another one of those Nintendo Switch 2 releases here and there. So yeah, that's actually pretty swell. Despite, on the other hand, I might get the horrible feeling for the fact that it might actually once again retain the stupid game keycard releases in regards to the forms of third-party supportive games, which is, you know, still it's rather unfortunate just because it did have some high expectations in regards to the forms of trying to revisiting Fallout 4, but on much more of a modern hardware when it comes to not only PlayStation 5, but in addition to Xbox Series X/S and even PC, Steam, and of course the newest edition, which is of course the Nintendo Switch 2. So yeah, you can get the idea for this point. Even though some fans are a little bit slightly disappointed, just because they were expecting to be able to have the next installment when it comes to the Fallout series of games, which I possibly understand why, for the fact that, well, no wonder why, that Fallout 4 is definitely a little bit more popular these days. Like, certainly it's a little bit popular compared to the forms of how it does it for likely Fallout 76 or something like that. I mean, I've heard about the Fallout games though, but I never actually experienced them for myself, you see, because, you know, I'm more into the forms of any other franchises I honestly still cared for, but that's besides the point, so... But yeah, for the most part, we did somehow deal with this boss no problem, even though sometimes the depth perception might throw you off at points, especially that we ended up in a conveyor belt. So, speaking of the conveyor belts though, I get the feeling for the next zone, we're about to be still able to try to interact with conveyor belts, which as a result, we're now going into the final zone if you don't have all 7 Chaos Emeralds, but since we've got every single Chaos Emerald in this version of the game, this is not technically the final zone just yet. So here we go, on to Panic Puppet Zone Act 1. So, obviously though, in this particular act, instead of trying to able to deal with the forms of those badniks in order to able to free those Flickies, so instead that these Flickies are now trapped inside the actual glass containers, and you need to find all 5 of them to be exact, in order to able to progress. So, and also as far as I'm aware, this will be the absolute final time to able to actually rescue those Flickies in the entire game. Not just by the forms of the SEGA Saturn version, mind you, but this also applies with the PC version, and on top of that, with Mega Drive/Sega Genesis version, so... But I digress. So, and as far as I'm aware, there's also going to be a new remake, which appears to be System Shock Remake. So it's not only going to be coming onto Nintendo Switch 1, but in addition to that, Nintendo Switch 2 version as well. And luckily, with that particular game in mind, thank God there was no game keycard release of that game, because unlike any other third-party supportive games, unfortunately suffers the forms of that stupid game keycard releases. So because of that, yeah, it's definitely a bit of a missed opportunity when it comes to the forms of third-party supportive games in the forms of a Nintendo Switch 2 library. I mean, I could imagine if Clue number 3 will be on Nintendo Switch 2, and if that's going to be listed on Game Keycard, well, I'm afraid to tell you, I'm about to get screwed no matter what, even with the actual consumers and stuff like that, which... Yeah, you get the idea for this point of how infamous the game keycards are, especially because no wonder why. The pricing for those game keycard third-party supportive games on Nintendo Switch 2 starts to drop a bit, so because of that, unlike the forms of how it does it on most of these first-party supportive games for Nintendo Switch 2, still stays on normal price as far as I'm aware, so yeah, that's besides the point. So, also, I really love the visual effects that has been going on with that particular background, if you couldn't tell, because there are certain doors occasionally opens and other times closes. So, yeah, again, I really do love the visual upgrade, specifically in this particular zone, because of the extra detail for all that animations has been played. So, anyway, so with that being said, folks, we somehow rescued every single Flickies in the whole entire game. So, you know what that means, folks? We are now going to be moving on to the next level. So, this means no Flickies needs to be saved anymore, because as a result, we're going from point A to point B in Panic Puppet Zone Act 2, so this means we need to make our way to the actual Robotnik's snot in the actual specific base, or the headquarters, or anything else like that. So, and I will say that this level can be felt a bit tricky at times, if only because of the fans, and you still got the annoying turrets which keep on shooting in every single directions, and because, you know, you pretty much get the idea for the fact that Panic Puppet Zone is basically Gene Gadget Zone Part 2, basically, because of all that. Similar mechanics, and also same stage hazards you might able to come across into. So yeah, you probably get the idea for the actual similarities when it comes to the previous zone, compared to the forms of how it does it for Panic Puppet Zone. Now, I will say though, there's that one particular section I somehow got stuck on my practice run-through of this game, because those stupid spider badniks caught me off guard, which as a result, I've honestly have no idea why. that those spider badniks give me a hard time in this particular level, my guess is that annoying projectile they just somehow keep on shooting at us, depending on where we are. So yeah, it's a little bit annoying, but regardless of such though, I really do wish if I was going to have myself the homing shield, because that way the homing shield will be a godsend when it comes to trying to deal with those stupid enemies like these. So, and yeah, as far as I'm aware, that the blue shield is also very useful, specifically not only in Gene Gadget Zone, but in addition to Panic Puppet Zone, because every time you step onto one of those electric panels, that actually protects you from electricity. So yeah, it seems pretty awesome in my book. So anyway, so we're essentially now on to the final stretch of the level. So I've honestly have no idea why that particular tilted tile just somehow opens up that little trap floor for some reason. But either way, oh yeah, we have to deal with this part right here, which again is because there's annoying hit detection. That means about the fact you will miraculously go through that platform no matter what. So yeah, it's a bit annoying for sure, because the depth perception needs to be the key factor around here. So yeah, this is the part I was talking about. I seriously got screwed over by that stupid little spider badnik early on, whenever I did manage to able to go up. So yeah, I found that section kind of annoying at times. Also, be very careful, because if you get knocked back, you might get pushed back no matter what. So yeah, inside we go into Robotnik's nostril nose. So yeah, that seems very odd to able to actually entering the area like that, which pretty much leads us to the next boss, or the final boss, if you don't able to actually collect all 7 Chaos Emeralds just before, you might get yourselves a bad ending no matter what. So anyway, time for the boss. So obviously though, we have to go through 3 phases on this fight. So the first phase, all you have to really do is you have to avoid that particular contraption when it goes like that. Although sometimes my timing is a bit off, I must admit. But then when the actual attack occurs, you need to able to keep on attacking into that, when that blue flashes constantly, it's your chance to able to actually attack either left or right sides. So it's all about quick timing reflexes going on around here. So yeah, always have to make sure you have to jump at the right time, so that way it actually decides to able to count as a hit. So but yeah, as far as I'm aware, if you get screwed over a couple of times though, there's no checkpoints, so you have to do this in one run, which that could be also applies for the final fight as well. So because of that, yeah, it feels like we're not doing that great, I have to be quite frank here. But that's mainly because no matter what though, it's been about 6 days ago since I actually have last played this game for sure, because relatively speaking, I was about the fact at this point in time, like what Sonic has already stated this earlier, for the fact that he will able to try to conclude Luigi's Mansion 3 by that time and during at some point exactly in Halloween Day. So that's gonna be part of his plan after all. So, and yeah, if you couldn't tell, unfortunately though, I've come across it's my 4th death. But that's mainly because I did not pay attention to that particular projectile. Did somehow directly homing on me. Well, I suppose it really doesn't matter, because I'm pretty sure we actually gathered as many of those medals as we possibly could. So potentially I might as well give myself my only 1 continue. So yeah, that's better than nothing, I suppose. Despite the fact that, well, so far, that we never actually dare come across into game overs in our Let's Plays department so far. Apart from, you know, a couple of exceptions, such as, of course, I'm looking at you, Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, because you are the most brutal games out of the bunch when it comes to difficulty and all that. So, but I digress. So, I suppose the next thing I want to point out too is about the fact that, well, conveniently enough, there's actually another game has already been confirmed, the actual release date. Such as, for instance, though, there's a game called Mouse, P.I. for Hire, and no matter what though, that game is now going to be confirmed to be releasing until next year in 2026. Specifically, March 19th in 2026. So it's going to be on PlayStation 5 alongside with Xbox Series X/S. I'm not entirely sure about the Switch 2 version though, but that's mainly because the phone's graphic fidelity or anything else like that. So, but at least we'll see what happens there. And fortunately enough though, I've recently just somehow gone back into Sonic Dash recently. And because of that, yes, I did somehow manage to unlock yet another character, but this time what appears to be another variation of Infinite, such as Cursed Samurai Infinite. So, no matter what though, just like the forms of how it does it on, well, Dragon Hunter Sonic, alongside with the forms of, well, Rifle Sonic, based off from Sonic Racing Cross Worlds. Suffice to say though, we have to once again try to collect the ridiculous amount of cards, specifically 500 of those legendary cards, in order to try to unlock that particular cosmetic character, as far as I'm aware. Although, fortunately enough, though, I did indeed manage to be able to unlock him. So, and as far as the forms of unlocking more characters, as far as I'm aware, in Mario Kart Tour, I don't know if it's possible for me to get another one for the time being, though. Just because, yet again, I do need to grind as many of those rubies as I possibly could, just in case I can able to almost try to complete the entire Mii Racing Suit's unlockable requirements, except one, because, you know, the gold one is a nightmare, just because of all that tier system you have to put up with. So, you pretty much get the idea of how much I absolutely despise the actual tier system in Mario Kart Tour. Plus, it's mainly because it's pretty frustrating most of the time, especially if you really want to go after, you know, good rewards, such as not only more rubies, but also with the forms of that particular gold Mii Racing Suit. So, anyways though folks, here's the final zone in Sonic 3D Flickies Island, or Sonic 3D Blast, specifically the SEGA Saturn version. And as you can see, we now ended up in the final fight. And as you can tell, the background is actually a lot more detailed this time around, because normally on the Mega Drive / Sega Genesis version, all you're really seeing is just a black background, and that's about it basically. Whilst in the Sega Saturn version, it does add a lot more details. Like, for instance, though, we ended up in the machinery kind of scenery and stuff like that. And as far as I'm aware, I'm pretty sure on the PC version that it might also has only black background. I'm guessing it's probably because of PC sprites limitations here and there. Well, yeah, I can definitely tell right from the start though, is that some people seem to really fully appreciate the Sega Saturn version a lot more because of that extra visual detail, so. But either way, what I thought was a little bit odd too is that unlike the Mega Drive / Sega Genesis version, if you do manage to defeat the boss in Panic Puppet Zone, then you do get yourselves the cutscene if you do manage to either get the bad ending, or if you get all the Chaos Emeralds in that particular run, then you're obviously able to see that cinematic cutscene, well, despite there are likely still images and stuff like that. And as far as I'm aware, it did manage to able to show us, well, not only for the fact that we did defeat the Panic Puppet, and also we were able to see Sonic along with 4 Flickies able to actually go all the way higher up, but depending on what ending you get, like for instance though, if you get the bad ending, that Eggman just says like, as long as I have this final weapon, I can conquer the world anytime. See you again, Sonic. But then if you try to get the good ending, you obviously get yourselves a different dialogue, such as prepare my final weapon. So, yeah, I think that's as far as I can try to say about it. Although, unlike the Sega Saturn version or the PC version, that particular scene doesn't exist, which I'm not exactly sure why that's the case though, but regardless of such though, it's about the fact that we did indeed gather all the Chaos Emeralds, so that's what really matters the most, so yeah, basically though, you have to go through all 5 of these sections twice in order to able to try to deal with the final battle in this game, so yeah, I guess there's nothing else to say about this, I suppose. So, anyway, the next thing I want to point out too, speaking of which, in regards to the forms of System Shock game as a remake for not only for Nintendo Switch, but in addition to Nintendo Switch 2 versions as well, obviously though is about the fact that I get the feeling that the Switch 2 version will indeed able to actually support Joy-Con 2 mouse support. So as a result though, I've got nothing else to say about that particular feature as far as I'm aware. Now I suppose technically that was actually the last thing I want to talk about in terms of the forms of today's discussion, and that's what it appears to be, the fact that recently Pokemon Legends EA has sold over 5.8 million copies in 1 week. So because of that, it's doing quite well, but nowhere near as a huge success compared to the forms of how it does it on, well, to be more specifically, Pokemon Legends Arceus. Well, it's in early stages, of course, expecting for the fact that because that game did recently came out in just around a couple of days back, specifically 9 days ago, despite how Pokemon fans obviously still criticizing again And no matter what though is about the fact that this is getting pretty ridiculous in terms of the forms of Pokemon fan bases alike, especially because of all that. Well, they really desperately want to see, you know, improved graphics and all that stuff. I mean, could you imagine if the next Pokemon game, specifically Pokemon Generation 10 game, will be on Nintendo Switch 2? At least that way, they can able to try to improve the visuals, but either way, that'll be a topic for a later time. So for now, we have essentially done every aspect of Sonic 3D Blast or Sonic 3D Flickies Island for the SEGA Saturn. And that is essentially the good ending of the SEGA Saturn version of Sonic 3D Blast. Now, if you get the bad ending, basically it shows us the fact that everything else goes all hunky-dory, right? Well, in between both Sonic and all 4 different Flickies, everything else is pretty much done, right? Well, apparently though, the Dimension Ring just somehow reappears out of thin air, and no matter what though, once you're able to enter in the actual Dimension Ring, it did shows us about the fact that Robotnik did somehow still got the Chaos Emeralds, and he just goes with that evil laugh like whoo ho 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 ho, and then fades to black in the process. So because of that, yeah, let's give my final thoughts of Sonic 3D Blast or Sonic 3D Flickies Island for the SEGA Saturn version. But before I mention about that, as you might able to hear on the background music, that right there is actually a vocal song, which appears to be You're My Hero, which I'm not exactly sure who performs that song, by the way. Let me know in the comments down below. But regardless of such though, I will say, this is certainly a good version of Sonic 3D Flickies Island, or Sonic 3D Blast, what region you lived in. I mean, sure, it's not great. I mean, regardless of such though, the isometric platforming can be felt a bit disorientating at times. I mean, at the very least, if you do manage to able to require to use the SEGA Saturn 3D control pad, that'll be a definition of the recommendation when it comes to the control scheme of this game. So as a result though, yeah, I do really like it. I mean, it's nowhere near as amazing as any other Sonic titles, but the Saturn version of this game is actually pretty good. I mean, there's one thing I absolutely despise about this version though, is the load times. They're just so horrendous. So, I mean, apart from those aside things though, that's as far as I can try to say about this particular version. So, I mean, relatively speaking though, some people might disagree, but between both the Mega Drive and the SEGA Saturn versions, I will say the Mega Drive version was okay. I mean, it's not the best, but regardless of such though, besides the soundtrack is so amazing to listen to. And as far as the SEGA Saturn version as far as I'm concerned, like I said earlier, it's pretty good. Not the best though, like I said, but yeah, you pretty much get the idea for this point. So, anyway, well, with that being said, folks, there was one honorable mention I want to classify for something. There was a game called Sonic 3D Blast 5. It's like a bootleg Game Boy game, and I do not recommend able to actually try that game out, because for one, the sound sounds really awful, and on top of that, the sprites are heavily based off from Sonic Triple Trouble, at least for Sonic sprites, and not only that though, the bandings are ripped right out of the forms of the Mega Drive games, and on top of that, there's only 5 levels, and not only that though, the game has no continues whatsoever. So relatively speaking though, and as far as I'm aware, the physics and the momentum just looks incredibly off. Like I honestly have no idea why I somehow experienced that game. Whenever when Sonic did tell me about this back in a very long time ago. But regardless of such though, that'll be a tale for another time. So with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching our Let's Play of Sonic 3D Blast or Sonic 3D Flickies Island for the SEGA Saturn version of this Let's Play. And this is me, Pac-Man, from the likes of Mexi Toys. And until then, we'll see you guys enjoying at some point in the next couple of days' time for a brand new Let's Play and also the final part of Luigi's Mansion 3. So I'll see you guys then. Bye.